This is Duke University.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's session on social proof, part of a surprise endings course, a massive open online course here at Duke University. Joining us today are Professor Davidson and Professor Ariely, and my name is Michael Hibashi, and I'm a senior here at Duke. So in our session today, we'll be covering a lot of topics related to social proof, and we've noticed that in social science, through Muzaer Sherif's analysis of social perception, we looked at Mean Girls, we looked at literature in Brave New World and Emperor's New Clothes. So Professor Davidson, Professor Ariely, we've seen a lot of these examples, so these color the concept of social proof for us, but what would you say is actually the definition of social proof?
We need to start with the social science.
So social proof is the idea that we don't really know what's the right behavior in many circumstances, and what we do is we look for others as a guide for what's the right behavior. So it's basically it's a combination of our lack of knowledge of what to do and looking at the majority as if everybody else knows what to do. And there's good things and bad things about it. So today I started teaching a big class, about 300 or 250 people, and I started the class by reading some nonsense gibberish. There's a website that creates random text, and from time to time I replace some words with Adam Smith or neoclassical economics and stuff like that. And I had Foucault, I quoted Foucault as well. And I read this thing to the students. I said, before we start the class, this was the first class, I said, before we start the class, let me give you a formal definition of behavioral economics. So I went into like 5 minutes of reading this nonsense, meaningless text. And what happened was that nobody said anything. And then I said, how come nobody says anything? And my point was to talk about what's called pluralistic ignorance. And pluralistic ignorance is the idea that if you see lots of other people doing nothing, you're going to do nothing as well. So the kind of standard experiment for this is you put one person in the room and you pipe smoke through the vents. If you're in the room by yourself, smoke coming in, you would come and leave. What happens if there are 400 people in the room? Now you look at everybody else. You see what everybody else is doing. Nobody's doing anything, therefore it must be the right behavior and you stay. And the reason I started the class like this is that in big classes there's always the problem of people not asking questions. You think the professor is saying something unclear or you don't know what to do, but you look at everybody else and say, I understand, but everybody else seems to be nodding. I'm probably the only idiot. But in fact, everybody looks at other people as a rule for what to do and create lots of negative effects.
That's a beautiful definition. I just want to give an example. I, many years ago, was up for a job interview in a small town in Illinois. And the newspaper said that there had been hotel fires at each of the 4 of the 5 hotels in the town. That night, the alarm goes off. It was deafening in my hotel. I threw on a coat over, my jammies, grabbed my purse and ran down the stairs because I know you're not supposed to take an elevator down. Go down to the lobby, and there's like these 2 90-year-old people, firefighters, and me. And I said, well, what's going on? They said, now you know why people die in hotel fires. Most people, what they do is exactly what Dan was saying, but in a real life situation, they stick their head out. If nobody's in the hallway, they close the door and stay in their hotel room. I was a chicken, so I and I thought, wow, we're in a town that has 5 hotels and 4 out of 5 have had an arson. I mean, that seems to me like good evidence that you should run. Yeah. But apparently, that's not what people do. They look, and if no one else is running, they stay in their room. Yeah. But to me, that's like the kind of life example that you remember that says it pays to stick out your neck, right? It's a very visceral example of don't worry about following the crowd because you might die in a hotel fire. It's a great parable for acting in the world. Not always wise, though. We'll talk about that, right? Not always wise. And you do feel a little dumb standing down in the lobby in your jammies and your trench coat, right? And when no one else is there. Right?
Professor Ariely, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the cult experience that you had a while back?
Yes. So I'm very interested in cults, and the reason I'm interested in cults is because I think they understand something about how to persuade people. Right? So social science, we're trying to inform people about how people really operate and so on. And then you have these cults that get science wrong, but nevertheless get lots of people to follow them. So I'm very curious about what are the messages that they are giving people. And I've been to 2 cult experiences so far. Each of them took about 3 days. And there's quite a lot of similarities between the 2 I've seen, and also between them and L. Ron Hubbard's Dynetics. And I think one of the principles that they're all using is social proof. So in one of them, I sat in the audience with 5,000 people. One of them was only 400 people, but still, both of them are very, very large. And what happens is that they get people to come up and say all kinds of things that all of a sudden change dramatically what people find acceptable and not acceptable. If you think about it, you're in this new situation with 5,000 people, you don't know, what can you talk about? What can't you talk about? Is it okay to start crying? Is it okay to talk about personal stuff? What do you do in this situation? Really unclear, but the moment you get one person to behave in a certain way, it all of a sudden defines continuously and what is acceptable. And throughout the 3 days of these cult things, you see how things escalate. Because here's the thing, you don't see the shy people. I mean, every action you see are the people who are basically willing to share in a broad way. So the leader says, anybody wants to share something, and somebody stands up and shares something extreme. That's the only thing you've heard shared. Now, there's lots of people who've not shared anything, but we don't take the average and say this person shared something on the 7-point scale, stuff high but not terrible, and everybody was at 0. Now you say, oh, this is the kind of thing people share. And then it goes up and up and up until people told so many personal stories. It was heart-wrenching. It was really hard to imagine, first of all, that people suffered so much and was so in such difficult childhood and lives. But you could see the process of escalation, and you could also see how they do all kinds of things to make that situation unlike regular life. So in one of them, every 20 minutes, they ask you to come and hug the person next to you. The moment you do that, first of all, it's kind of nice, right? It's nice to be friendly with people and so on, but it basically tells you the rules that apply in this situation are not the rules that apply in regular life. Just try to walk around campus today and offer somebody a hug, right? It wouldn't. but you could do lots of things. You could do lots of things to basically say, this is the situation where the normal rules of life don't work, and here's the new rules of life that basically start emerging and can get quite extreme.
So I think in American society, we even see a discrepancy between somewhat of a similar dichotomy where, individualism is very touted, and, we want to be the type of people who are against the status quo. But we also determine our social capital, or determine our likability based on Facebook likes, or how many views we have on YouTube, if we have a video posted. So what does this really tell us about the presence of social influence in our lives?
Well, clearly, on micro and macro levels, the institutions we're part of shape who we are. How we dress. I always find it amusing at Halloween that even on Halloween, people dress unconventionally in the same way. If you're seeing trick-or-treaters come by, there's like a group of costumes that you're going to see over and over and over again on Halloween. And anyone who's ever been to parties, you wonder how that gets communicated. Well, clearly, it's communicated in some norm and some shared culture that's articulated. But I think the ways to be individual in a group that's fascinating. In other words, what the boundary of unconventionality is versus the boundary of insanity, right? And that's sometimes not so clear what is what in societies historically. We know this from literature, we know this from history. People that are too nonconformist sometimes get treated as if they're not just not conforming to a group, but opposed to the group. Incendiaries, subversives, or madmen. It's a long honored tradition in history. And I think, in fact, one reason that in other periods and times we had the role of the court jester is the court jester was by definition and by role the person who could dissent from public opinion, dissent from the king without getting his head lopped off, because that was his job. So you almost took the function of the individual and placed it in one official role of the fool. So the fool could actually tell you something wise that you needed to hear. Could say, there's a gorilla in the room when everyone else is counting basketballs and not seeing the gorilla. It's a very important role. But it's fascinating that we have to appoint that role and sanction, authorize that role to feel comfortable with the real nonconformist or the real opponent, oppositional voice.
So, continuing on this, we did a study once at the Carolina Brewery. And here is what we did. Me and my friend Jonathan Leval, we came to people who came to dine together, and we said, we have 4 beers today. And we described the 4 beers. And then we went to one person at random and said, what would you like? And what would you like? And the 4 of them. And then we did the same thing for another group, but instead of asking them out loud, we asked them to mark on the little menu what they wanted. So some people made the order out loud, and some people did it privately. And we had about 50 groups in each condition. And the question was, will the orders be different? And what we found is that the people who ordered out loud ordered more different beers per table. So basically it's as if, let's say it's about food, I like salmon, but you were the first one to order and you ordered salmon, I feel like I can't have salmon anymore. You've kind of taken salmon. And then even if I don't like chicken, I'm stuck with chicken. Now, why do people do it? We found that the tendency is correlated to a personality trait called need for individualism, need for self-expression of the person, right? So when you order, you say, I really want beer A, India Pale Ale, let's say, but somebody took it already. If I order the same beer, it would look like I'm just following him or her. I don't want to do that, so let me order summer wheat. Like nobody likes summer wheat. In our sample, people didn't like it so much. But you get stuck with something you don't like. Now, when people got what they liked, what they ordered, we asked them, do you like it? They didn't, right? So at the moment of ordering, you're saying, what do I like and what impression do I want to give people? And you balance those two, but then when you get the order, you regret that you cared about other people's opinions. So first of all, there's a lesson there, which is always order first, right? Because if you order first, you're unencumbered. And in fact, when we looked at the group of ordered out loud, the first person was perfectly happy. It just happiness went down as you went down the list because more and more of your beers went, somebody else took it. Now, Kathy mentioned this idea that how much uniqueness versus not we want to take, and I think the same thing goes in restaurants. So people want to order a different main dish, but if the first person ordered appetizers, people order appetizers. If one person ordered dessert, people do. So at the global level of appetizers, salads, main course, dessert, drinks, and so on, people follow the other people. But within it, people want to show their individuality. So if I kind of an analogy, I think we all want the same make of shirt, but we just want different colors, right? So we have kind of a range in which we want to be different, the same, and then we have a range that we want to be different. And trying to figure out exactly how that works is quite interesting.
So I think we also can see individualism when you don't conform to the norms. And we see in the Pulp Fiction clip that we presented, Vincent Vega actually shoots his colleague Marvin, accidentally or not accidentally, it's up to debate. But he blames a bump in the road for his misfailure or his misfiring. And we had some interesting comments from the class, and some people seemed confused by it. But what are your thoughts?
I'm not sure it matters in some ways. I think the whole point is that he does something so extreme that he's able to show that, one, be careful, because you're with somebody who's likely to, even after he shoots him, he's throwing this gun around in a pretty scary way that if I were the driver of the car, I'd be a little worried about. So he's showing that he's powerful. And he's also showing that he really has no regard for human life. Because like the big issue in that clip is not, oh, I did something horrible, I just killed somebody. The issue is, did I kill someone because I was an idiot and was waving a gun around and wasn't paying attention, or because there was a bump in the road? So you're taking the value of human life and reducing it to this triviality, which means I think humans are trivial and I'm willing to blow anyone's head off, including yours. So that's how I read that.
Yeah, and I would echo that. So I think that if you ask under what conditions could new norms emerge, it has to be conditions that basically tells you that your regular rules of life don't apply. So you come to college and probably the first few weeks, month in college define your experience and what is acceptable and not acceptable. You come to a new place, something defines. Here's a movie just starting, and we're saying what are the regular norms that apply to here, and we have a debate about French fries, and we have a debate about, did the bump on the road kill this person, and they seem like the same debate, right? And I think it's exactly this idea that the regular rules for life don't apply here. These people have very different rules, and once we understand that normal rules don't apply to them, we're willing to accept lots of other things that would happen in the movie.
So in regards to the Mustafa Sharif piece, you're basically setting the frame of reference. And the frame of reference is pretty nutty, right? This is a frame of reference through which you're going to see all the actions, and the frame has to be a little flexible.
So this seems to be Tarantino's style, though. Did you think that the clip was humorous at all?
I thought it was terrifying. I did not think it was humorous at all. Sorry.
I think humorous is not the word I would describe. I definitely thought it was
Effective.
he made the point that it was effective. Humorous would be my description.
Well, I have to let you all in on a little secret. So what we actually did was we sent you, Professor Ariely, a clip of the film with a laugh track added, and we also did the same thing for half of the class. And you, Professor Davidson, received the original clip, and the other half of the class received the original clip as well. So we wanted to see how this interaction or this added laugh track would actually play into the perception of the students, and we had some interesting findings actually. So I went back and looked at all of the responses regarding Pulp Fiction, and all of the students who received the clip with the laugh track added actually said it was humorous, except for 2 students who just didn't comment about it, the humor or not the humor. But all of the students who didn't receive the laugh track added clip, just the original, just remarked on the gruesome nature of it, the morbidity of it, Tarantino's style. And so this conversation about humor was absent from those posts. So what do you think that this tells us about social proof as a very real life example for our class?
One question first. Was the laugh track in the original?
No.
No, you added the laugh track.
Well,
so what I saw was the original.
You saw the original, that's correct.
I could have used the laugh track.
That's why I asked if it was humorous.
Yeah, but I watched it quite a while ago, so it might have been that if I watched it just before, I would have found it more humorous as well. So I think it's a great example. It's a great example of something that could be interpreted in multiple ways, as you've shown. And a laugh track is basically creating a social norm, saying, look, the other people who are watching it, this is their common reaction, therefore it's much easier to create that reaction as well. By the way, it's kind of interesting in movie theaters, when you have some people laugh, other people get to start laughing as well. There is something of a contagion about it when you say, oh, this is funny. How do you know? Not because you're experiencing anything funny, but because people around you are deciding this is funny, and therefore this is becoming acceptable. So that's great.
We like to think we are independent thinkers, but things like a laugh track added to a very morbid clip actually makes us change our view. And on that note, the Nolan study, in which she analyzed Californians' behavior in terms of water conservation, she found that normative social influence actually affected the behavior of these Californians. They said that they weren't going to be influenced by the neighborhood, but actually that turned out to be the greatest correlation between their actual behavior and their decisions. So, what do you have to say about that?
So I think the issue of social proof and influence on behavior actually has 2 important points. One is that it works, and the second one is that people don't predict that it would work. So in one version of these studies, they went to people in some neighborhoods outside LA, and they said, we have 3 ways to try and convince people to save energy. We can tell them it would save them money, We could say it's good for the environment, or we could say everybody does it. And they said, what do you think would work? And people said, I would be influenced by the environmental appeal because that's the kind of person I am. My neighbors would be influenced by the money because that's the kind of people they are. And nobody would care about the social appeal. Why would you care about what other people are doing? Then they waited a few months and they ran the study for real. A third of the people got the social appeal, a third got the environmental appeal, a third got the financial appeal. The only thing that worked was the social appeal. Other people are like that. So there's actually two things happening here. One is that the social appeal is important, but the second is we don't see it happening. Like how would you figure out what information would work on you or not? You would try to simulate it. And you say, oh, money, I can understand. This would save money. Environment, I can understand. Other people are doing it. Why would any reasonable person do that? Why would you care? So you don't think it would work on you, so people don't predict it. And actually, if you think about the world, there's lots of places where we could create social proof. We can create appeal by what other people are doing. But often people don't do it. And the reason we don't do it is because we don't think it's that important. And the exception, of course, are social networks, right? When all of a sudden, and you can think about lots of nuances. Facebook. Why do you think Facebook doesn't have a dislike button? Right? Because let's say you post something and 7 people like, but 60 people didn't react to it. If you had 7 people like and 60 don't like, or 60 don't react, why don't you have the proportion of people who like based compared to the people who've seen it? Right? That would be actually very useful data, but you wouldn't feel so good in most cases.
You'd probably drop off Facebook, right? They're smart enough to know that it would be a disincentive to be on Facebook.
So you only portray the positive things without portraying the negative things, and therefore the social proof looks larger than it really is. Gives you the illusion, look at how many likes I have. Proportion might not be that much, and that really, really drives behavior.
So I think sometimes it takes an outsider looking in to actually analyze the social influence in our lives. Do you think that we can be proactively engaging in this analysis of actual social influence in our lives?
You know, I think I personally think that knowing things doesn't mean that you can change your behavior easily, but that knowing things can help you build tools, partners, and methods that will help you change things. So a lot of what I do is try to think about ways institutions, whatever that is, whether it's family, gym membership, workplace, education primarily, what kinds of institutional supports you can have to a changed way of thinking. It's one reason we organize the class this way. In fact, I loved the readings that you assigned for this class because in many ways they got to the deep structure of what we're doing in this class. You know, basically saying, in a world where for the first time in human history, I can have an idea, I can go to my computer, I can communicate that idea, and anyone else in the world with a network connection can read what I'm saying without an editor, without a publisher, without a censor, without any of the filtering mechanisms. We're in a world of a different kind of individual responsibility, especially in our professional educational lives. What have we done as an institution of higher education, or K through 12, to prepare this generation, this world, for that affordance, for that possibility in the world? So one of the reasons that this class is arranged so that students are taking responsibility and you put us in the hot seat is that's closer to the world we're living in now. And I think there's all kinds of ways you can help to rearrange the circumstances of your life, whether it's a to-do list, which would be the simplest way, which works for a lot of people, to feedback, like Fitbit, if you're talking about exercise or calorie management, to the way you train people, to the kind of assessment you use, the tools of assessment, to who you put in charge and how you put them in charge and what role you assign them within a group. But I do think it takes that extra step of thinking, I'm going to get it wrong if I do it myself. There's no way I can count basketballs and see a gorilla. Just can't do it. I can do one, I can do the other. If I'm doing one, I'm not doing the other. That means I have to assign somebody. I have to have a function where somebody is not looking in the same way that I'm looking. Or the most recent one that you may have all seen about the lung scans. And this actually came up with an argument that I was having with a attention researcher, where he said, well, if you were really trained to look carefully, you would be able to both count the basketballs and see the gorilla. And in fact, the only group of people that's been able to do that are referees, not coaches, not basketball players, but referees. Because as a referee, you always work in tandem and you learn, it's called scant glance. You don't look directly at scan glance. You kind of scan for patterns. You don't ever do anything directly. So the recent experiment that had a little gorilla in the lung scans, actually a physical gorilla, and there's 4 or 5 slides and the gorilla kind of dances in the slides. And 83% of professional radiologists did not see the gorilla in the lung scan. It's a little scary, right? But they were looking for a kind of tumor that was white. They weren't looking for a gorilla, so they didn't see the gorilla in the lung scan. But if you know that, and you're not looking just for a certain kind of cancer when you're looking at the x-rays, but you're looking for anything that might be wrong, maybe you should make sure that you're not just having oncologists look at the x-rays. Maybe you have to have somebody who maybe isn't even trained to say, what do you see here? And describe it narratively. No multiple choice, no parameters, just describe what you see here. You know, of course, if you looked at the famous gorilla and basketball video and just said to somebody, didn't set them a task, but said, what do you see here? They would see the gorilla, they would see passing basketballs. They probably wouldn't count that it was 15 basketballs. That wouldn't be the task, but they would describe it differently. So again, because the frame of reference defines what you see, having people who have different frames of reference, including cultural diversity and all kinds of other issues, can help you see a bigger picture. But I think that needs to be engineered. I don't think it happens naturally, or it happens naturally only by accident.
So let me echo this in two ways. One is, I think it's very tough for us to see the social influences on our lives. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of things that we just don't think as decisions. Having kids, going to college. I mean, there's lots of things that, you know, even if you think you're making that decision, you're not really thinking about it that carefully. And we don't think of them because this is kind of the way things are. And if you're in that society, it's very hard for you to really ask the question of what things am I actually considering and actually thinking about, and what stuff am I just accepting? This is just the right way, and I'm deciding who to marry, but I'm not deciding, if that's a good idea or not, right? And I think it's very, very tough to pull ourselves out and try to observe things from another perspective. And I think that's why it's sometimes good to study other cultures, because the kind of things it's hard for you to study on yourself, you might be able to study in another place, and then once you see it in another place, come back to your own culture and see things. And personally, I think it was very useful for me to be in hospital for a long time, because I got to have an outside perspective on my own society, right? Once you're out for a long time, you can have a fresher look at how things are. When we think about social science, there's a question of freedom of will, right? And we say, well, you don't really act on your own decision. It's basically driven by other people. You just follow the herd. You don't know what to do. You don't pay attention. And it gives the sense of people being automatons rather than individual free thinkers who have the decisions of what you want to do. And we have this tremendous sense that we are deciding what to do, but nevertheless, lots of the results show that we are not really in the driver's seat. We just kind of are being pushed in one way or another. And it's not we have zero ability to make decisions, but it's less than what we usually think. And this is actually where this issue of designing our environment becomes very important. So you can say, as individuals, could we have more freedom of choice? Could we come to every situation and basically consider all the aspects more broadly, make better decisions? The answer is probably not. Maybe from time to time, maybe for important decisions, but the way that freedom of will comes from is from designing our environment. So if you go and every morning I covered your desk with donuts, you'll eat more donuts. I mean, there's not a big question there, right? Your freedom of choice would be limited by the environment you're in, but you don't have to cover your desk with donuts every day. So we have a choice in which environment we create for ourselves, and lots of things are the environment we create for ourselves, but once we create the environment, we're a little bit more automatons than we would like to admit it, but our freedom comes from deciding where we want to live, right? What kind of political system we want, what kind of rules, what kind of regulation, what kind of temptations do we want to have. And once we design the environment, that's where we express our freedom of will.
So would you say that, given the study by Nolan and the article on Facebook behavior actually affecting your voting choices, does that actually mean that we need to tell people how other people are acting in order to get them to act that certain way?
To tell people.
So I think it depends on whether you have an objective of how people would behave. So one of the nicest studies on voting basically asked the following question: how should you get people to vote? Should you say nobody's voting, so you should go and vote? That's one approach. And the second one is saying everybody's voting, so you should go as well. And you can see what both of them could work, right? The nobody's voting one says, your vote would matter more because nobody else is voting. The one that everybody's voting is the social proof one. Turns out the one that says everybody's voting is more effective. Now, if you want people to go to vote, you should use that approach. If you don't want people to vote, then you should use the other approach. I think in many cases, we need to worry about kind of the extent to which we're willing to do social engineering. And so every time you learn one of those tricks about how to influence people, you have to decide under what conditions are you willing to use it. Right? What are you willing to use to convince people to act in a certain way? When is it moral? When is it not moral? If you knew something, would you be willing to use it to get people to smoke more frequently? Or to take more drugs? Or, there's lots of behaviors that you can decide whether this is the right, whether you're willing to use this trick of social proof to get people to behave a certain way or not. And it's a deep moral question. I don't have the answer for it. Sometimes I feel like I know the answer. For example, I feel quite confident that we should get more Americans to save money for retirement. I think that's a situation good for everybody. I think it would be good if we reduced obesity. I mean, there's lots of things that I think are okay. There's lots of things that are much, much more tricky.
Unless you live in Cyprus and then you find out the government's going to use your retirement income to pay off its debt, which is pretty scary. All right.
By the way, Cyprus, Greece, for example, actually, Greece, I want to say, when you have a whole country that is not paying taxes, right? Why would you be the first one? Right? Basically, nobody's paying taxes. That's the appropriate behavior. Let's us behave like this as well. Right? No reason to go against the grain.
Right.
To use the terms related in The Emperor's New Clothes, is there a time in your life where you failed to see the clothes?
Oh, you mean where everybody was saying one thing and I went along with it? I'm sure there's so many that I wouldn't know. How would you know? How,
You're the professor.
That's scary. All right. By disposition, I'm the person who would order. Actually, I'm the wise person who orders first because I don't want to be swayed by other people. By disposition, I'm the person who always would say. In fact, a recent email from one of our leaders at our university said, "I'm glad to know how you think." And in fact, I always know how you think. So I think it's probably my personality to think that I'm the person who says, the emperor's not wearing any clothes, and to think that's my job. But I guarantee that if Dan were doing an experiment on me, he'd find lots of times when my self-definition as the person who spots the naked king is probably false.
So for me, I'm sure there are many, many cases, but probably the most extreme one was the first time I went to Burning Man. So Burning Man is a festival in the desert, and people create art, and there's no money, and it's all a gift exchange. But it's not a gift exchange that you give something and something gives back to you. You just give things to people, and then the hope is that the law of karma would work out, and eventually people would give things to other people, and so on. And the first time I went, it was interesting to get exposed to a very different rule. And I think the fact that they had no money made it possible for lots of social norms to come. So you can come and you can give people gifts, and you get random hugs and all kinds of other things. And I was in this environment for a week, basically living in a very, very different way with different rules. And then I flew to New York from there. And I landed, I took the subway to the city, and I got out, and I just tried to get somebody to give me directions of where I was. And I couldn't get anybody to talk to me, right? So a few hours earlier, anybody would hug me. And all of a sudden, right, I couldn't get somebody to point me where's east. And it was interesting that I was still, like I was at Burning Man, took me a day, got complete used to new social norms and what's acceptable and not acceptable, and there's very little that is not acceptable there. And then I landed in New York, and it basically took me a couple of hours. But that's all it takes. You go to a different environment, and very quickly the rules and what's acceptable and not acceptable, how you approach people, what you ask for, do you look them in the eyes, how close you stand to people, all of those things, we don't think of them as social norms, but they are social norms. And they basically dictate a lot of the niceties and how we behave to other people. And you can switch very, very quickly with the right environment.
So we've dwelt a lot on the negative aspects of social proof. How can we leverage social proof for good?
Well, I think we've been talking about that there's all kinds of ways that you can actually engineer certain crowd reactions, certain group reactions for a positive thing. The trickier part, I think, is figuring out what is good, what isn't good. As Dan said, certain things are very clearly a good. Other things are a lot more difficult. And people who've tried to engineer social good, like Mayor Bloomberg outlawing big gulps, get a lot of pushback from people who feel that that's gun control. People who push back saying, no, that's actually evil. It seems like it's good, but there's actually something evil going on there. So I think these are complicated issues, and that's what makes it a fascinating and important discussion.
So I think we can talk about two types of emerging social norms. One is that emerges naturally. And I think the problem with things that emerge naturally is that it's more likely for us to observe bad behavior than good behavior. So think about your driving. Who do you see as most salient? The people who are speeding. Think about you watching a game. Who do you see? Who's the most salient? The people who are really crazy and can create a riot. Let's say people steal bicycle on campus. This is the thing that would draw attention, that somebody is stealing bicycle. So it's often the case that we see the bad behavior, athletes and doping. We see the bad behavior, we don't see the good behavior. The good behavior is the norm might be, but we don't see it as salient. So therefore, every time we see a deviation, our understanding of what's acceptable and not acceptable shifts. So that, I think, is one problem with self-emerging norms. And you can think about the Arab Spring, for example, and you could say, how could some riots or some kind of demonstration be so peaceful and some could be so violent? Is it the same people? Yes, it could be the same people, but you had a few outliers who basically started misbehaving in a place that had no acceptable social norms, and all of a sudden it was easy to follow that behavior. So we have the self-emerging social norms, and those are more tricky. And then we have the ones that are externally imposed. And those actually we have more control, right? We could tell people, just so you know, most people when they come to watch a game, 99% of the people don't behave badly. I'll give you one example. Noah Goldstein, who is Cialdini's ex-student, told me this. He said that one of his friends was driving down in Arizona with his wife, who was one of the sweetest persons in the world, a woman who would, he said, never steal a thumbtack from the office. And they drive through this national park, and they see a big sign that says every year, it's this park that have the wood is kind of petrified, so the petrified wood forest. Anyway, they drive through this, and there's a sign that says every year people take 23,000 pounds of petrified forest. Don't take it. I'm not sure about the 23 number, but that's what it says. And his friend is driving, so she elbows him and says, "Let's take ours." Right? And Cialdini said this is the worst sign in the world. Why? Because what this sign says is everybody else is doing it. right? What they should have done, and actually they did this, they should have said every year 99.99 of the petrified forest is left where people found it, right? Which one do you emphasize, right? And they actually did lots of experiments where they changed the signs and they basically marked little pieces of wood and they saw what people stole and didn't steal and so on. It turns out it's really important. So when we create externally, we don't wait for the emerging social norms, but when we create externally a set of social norms, then we can have lots of freedom and decision about what do we want to portray. Do we want to portray what's stolen or what's kept? And if we do one versus the other, it will have very different effect on how people behave. So I think it's actually incredibly important. By the way, the people who set up this sign, what Cialdini called the worst sign in the world, do you think that's what they wanted? For more people to steal? Of course not. But it's because we don't understand how social proof works. Right? So they made a sign, good idea, made a terrible sign. If they understood how social proof works, they would have made a very different sign, would have helped much more.
All right, one final question. Since both of you do consulting for large global corporations, how might you recommend social proof as a way for management to improve their operations or grow their business?
Depends on what their business is. You know, if they're, and I think the example that Dan just gave suggests that it depends on if you're selling something or protecting something. You're using different methods, but one of them is absolutely to be aware that we are social animals and that we do tend to act as social animals, and to keep that in mind for whatever your outcome is or whatever the goal is of your company. I tend to work more on a micro level in terms of collaboration and management and figuring out ways to have innovation happen, even in a collaborative environment where you might feel like you have to all do the same thing in order to get a raise or to get a promotion, and to figure out how to make diverse teams that can come up with the most innovative decisions. So then I do a little bit of the beer example of who goes first, and even sometimes planting the suggestion of who goes first and what they say in order that other people come up with other points of view to add creativity to the mix.
So I'll tell you a little story. This is a big consulting company who shall remain nameless. But they had a rule that if you stay in the office past a certain hour, you could order food on the company's dime from a restaurant, and then you could take a company's car home. Now imagine you're on a big floor and you just passed this rule. Who do you see? Do you see the people who stay after you? Or do you see the people who at 8:01 call the Chinese food, get it delivered at 8:05, and then go into a company's car and leave the office? Right? The people who are the most salient are the people who are really misbehaving and going early. Now, at the end of the day, of course, the company is passing this charge to their clients, but the whole thing is really kind of shady, right? I mean, if the point is to be nice to the people who stay longer, the point is not to say it's 8:01. That's your time. But very quickly it became the norm, because you see the people who are doing it, and then you stay until 8:32. Like you feel like, oh my goodness, I wasted 30 minutes. And very quickly it became a terrible, basically an epidemic of how to do it. But it has these difficult elements of who is observable and what is a social norm. When you announce a new rule like this, how do you describe the rule? If you describe the rule in this term, you stay until 8, that's the rule. There's lots of uncertainties about what does it mean. Does it mean that if you want to stay longer, is it at 8:05 okay, 8:07? So you announce a rule, it's not clear how the rules appear. The people who are basically salient are the people who are abusing the rule, and all of a sudden you have a very bad situation. Now the question, of course, is how to fix it, and we have a few ideas. We'll see if any of them works. Because, by the way, once you've gotten people used to that privilege, it's hard to take it away from them.
Yeah. Actually, I'm interested in Marissa Mayer coming into Yahoo and making the workforce that's been a large part of whom have been working away from the office coming back into the workforce to work a 9 to 5, or not 9 to 5 day, but an actual day at the office. Because workplace studies show, in fact, that people who do the same job out of the office versus in the office are about 13% more productive. But Yahoo's not doing very well. So one of the things she's engineering is a massive cultural change. It says we have to do more than 13% better. So she's really changing, making a behavioral but she's making a risk. I mean, we've seen the video in here of the monkey who's really mad that he's being paid in grapes. I mean, in cucumbers instead of grapes. It's not clear yet whether Yahoo employees are going to start thinking they're getting the cucumber instead of the grape, and that might backfire. But it's a fascinating social engineering of a massive cultural change of a company that has to have a change if it's going to survive.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight, and thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for the next segment on gender and success.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.